The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord. As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When Jesus saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." As they were going, they were cleansed. One of them, realizing he had been healed, returned glorifying God in a loud voice, and he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? Then he said to him, "Stand up and go your way. Your faith has saved you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today is the non-obligatory memorial of St. Albert the Great, who died in the year 1280. We use the opening collect or the opening prayer for Albert, simply because I chose to, and the rest of our Mass prayers will be for the votive Mass for giving thanks to God. Albert was a rather intelligent individual. He really was a master of philosophy and theology and, honestly, all the sciences. He was the teacher, one of the teachers of St. Thomas Aquinas. Obviously, he was well educated. He came from, I don't know if I can say a royal family, but a wealthy family. His father was high-to-do in the military frame. But he found himself educated and could have really had any kind of life he wanted. But he chose the life of priesthood as a Dominican. He was, for some time, the superior of the German Dominicans. He was, for a time, the Bishop of Regensburg, where he fostered peace and helped to build cities in that early century. Yesterday's reading from the Book of Wisdom was a little more palatable, it seemed to me. Why is it that when we hear these wisdom readings, you really have to sort of open your brain and try to figure out what they're saying? It seems wisdom should be a little easier than that. Wisdom is simply to sincerely love God. If we're truly loving God for who God is, not just the favors God bestows upon us, but loving God for who God is, and one is doing that through the path and the course of their life, wisdom will simply become evident. So I'll cheat and jump ahead, and you'll hear this reading tomorrow. And I'll only do this because I think it refers quite reflectively well on St. Albert. How did one person get so much intelligence? But he did not live by his intelligence. He lived by faith. And it was that faith in his love for God, giving his life for Christ, and supporting all the mendicant Dominicans who lived, in a sense, in the streets, going around to the poor in a contemplative reflection in the power of the Word of God. In wisdom is a spirit, intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, agile, clear, unstained, certain, not baneful, loving the good, keen, unhampered, beneficent, kindly, firm, secure, tranquil, all-powerful, all-seeing. That's a mouthful. How do we come to know any of those? Only if we're loving God. Because wisdom is simply another word for God. As we reflected in the past, wisdom is personified as Lady Wisdom. It is the feminine wisdom or the feminine love of God That was the short list. The reading goes on for another paragraph or two. All these adjectives and expressions, virtues of wisdom. You might ponder that today. The gospel is plainly obvious, or not. One reflection from Living Faith, I think by a layperson, was why is it so much more common, why is it always easier to ask than to give thanks? It's an interesting dynamic. I know I thank God every day in my prayer, but if I'm honest, it's probably after I've asked the Lord for half a dozen things first. Gratitude in some ways is like wisdom. If you love God, then you realize that any favor you have, regardless of how small or great it is, there is inevitably the virtue of humility in gratitude, because it realizes its dependence on God's favor. Now you might say, okay, well, was Jesus sort of picking on them? Like I only get this foreigner who's going to thank me? Was he demeaning the foreigner? No. He was lifting up the foreigner. But as we well know, Jesus himself was Jewish, and he thought, well, where's my own country people, my own kinsmen? I mean, they're not going to give thanks to God? It might be a case where religion is just getting in the way. They presumed a blessing, because that was the style or dynamic through which they have come to know God. It's a very odd dynamic, really. On their way, they realized that they had been cleansed. I don't think that took a lot of great insight, would you think? Leprosy was painful, with open sores and pustules and all that real nice, sweet kind of stuff. You think if that would get cleansed, they'd know it right away. And their whole lives would be radically different. They could go back to their wives and their husbands, and they go back into the community. They wouldn't have to be unclean and believe themselves to be rejected by God. You'd think you'd be aware of that. But at very least, they did what Jesus told them to do. They went to the temple. Maybe it's the case of missing the baby for the sake of the bathwater. They went to the temple so they could get a certificate of certification that said they were no longer a leper. Maybe there was a sense of entitlement. Yeah, good. I'm going to go get that certificate, and I can prove to everybody that I'm okay. I can come back to town. But God is missed. Notice, on their way, as they were going, they were cleansed. One of them realized he had been healed. What's the difference? Cleansed would imply they realized they no longer had their malady. Healed implies an interior movement. It implies faith. There's a humility in this Samaritan. Now, there's a longer dynamic here, of course. The Samaritan doesn't care about the temple. They won't let him in there anyways. He's not limited by the perception and understanding of church religion. He knows that a power happened. He knows that Jesus, did he really know who Jesus was? He knew that Jesus, whoever he was, said a word or had a power or had a reality that he gave freely to the Samaritan. So when the guy comes back, he falls on his face and thanks Jesus. And Jesus does not say, stand up and go your way. Because you appreciated me, you're going to be okay. No, stand up and go. Your faith has saved you. It's long been a theology of understanding and the healing ministry of Jesus that although obviously it was an activity of divine compassion in the human person of Jesus, parenthetically, when we say Jesus is fully human and fully divine, his full divinity was only seen and realized because he became fully human. It was his full humanity, that in the maturity, the wholeness of his human person, that his divinity was recognized. So he could see the humility and the faith in the foreigner, the Samaritan. And he knew it was faith that inspired the person to come back and give thanks. Worthy of our pondering. Gratitude heals. Even the medical sciences now, in many expressions and forms, are using prayer and movements and rhythms of gratitude. Gratitude heals the mind, the body, the soul, the spirit. It heals bitterness and resentment. But it takes humility. We don't like to be indebted to people. We don't like to be dependent. But the reality is we are all dependent on God. Let's give thanks to God today, even if it's just because all your lights are green when you're in a hurry. Or maybe you can thank God because the person next to you got sick and you didn't. Whatever. Little things, big things. Let's humble ourselves and be grateful, because then we'll realize wisdom. Let's be blessed this day by the wisdom of St. Albert the Great. Let's bless him with our prayer. And whatever we do, whatever we have, whatever we get, and whatever we give, let us give thanks and praise to the Lord our God.